recite the Shema now, and you notice that there are two letters, the Ayin and the Dalet, which are larger. That the two letters together spell out the word aid, meaning witness. In a terribly fragmented world, we give witness to God's unifying oneness. As we say together,
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
And again, we welcome you all at this special gathering as we remember the expulsion of the Jews from Spain and the Inquisition with its tribunals and executions. So welcome and thank you for all who have participated in this. Yes, and just so that there's not a cross feedback, would you please go and mute yourselves so that the only noise, the only audio will be coming from us here as we are together. So please, you just take a moment to mute yourselves. And now we would like to continue with Sarah Ruth de Marquez reading a poem, Book of Life. Over to you, Sarah Ruth.
Loving Written of William Abraham and Dr. Ruth. The Book of Life. The Book of Life is counted, each and every one of my brothers, by the reflection of one's own deeds. It's looked upon with great care and great need. You see, the seed within each life is planted to be born, but it is the person, he himself, who creates the form, else he just buried so softly and deep mourns. The spirit of life, more than just the whispers of a love, it is a harmonious song that's sung from up above. Reflections through the windows, deep within our souls. These are looked upon by God, Almighty, great and Lord. The rings that link with time and love, understanding brings wisdom too. Are these a fairy tale that's never to come true? No, my brother, you listened with your heart. This book of life is real and true, limited through. Few thereof will make it, and others linger to. The pages are but numbered, and lessened to include you. Eternity is waiting. Beyond lies the world anew, creation in adornment, a love that is forever true. Loving memory. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. It is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Professor Dr. Seth Ward, teaches Jewish and Islamic Studies at the University of Wyoming. He's been an active member of the Crypto-Jewish Research Team and is an active board member of the Society for Crypto-Jewish Studies. He's been involved with this for several decades. He has lived in Denver for close to 3 decades, was active in the Denver Institute of Jewish Studies. Prior to his teaching in Wyoming, Ward's main teaching positions were at the University of Denver's Center for Judaic Studies, where he was the director of the Institute for Islamic Judaic Studies. He also taught at the University of Haifa. Professor Dr. Ward received academic degrees from Yale University, with additional studies at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem and also the Jewish Theological Seminary. It is my great pleasure to have Professor Dr. Seth Ward speak about Spanish Inquisition, history, heritage, misconceptions, and modern legacies. Dr. Seth Ward.
Thank you very much. Hear, O earth and heavens, I will weep many tears for the destruction of thousands from the day I left Jerusalem.
You're muted. Dr. Ward, you need to... Oh, there you go.
Okay. You know, that's what comes from being a good citizen and muting. My computer is set up, usually, as we found earlier today, not to hear that much from the background. But there we go. Good morning, everybody. Hear, O earth and heaven, and I will weep many tears for the destruction of thousands from the day I left Jerusalem. There will be an especially great wail for the year 1391, for the community of Seville was destroyed, and many communities in Castile. The communities of the people of Andalusia and Provincia were struck by evil. Catalonia was disgraced together with Aragon. This poem, written by Yehuda ben David Negro ibn Yahya, refers to the tragic events of 1391. In that year, there were anti-Jewish riots all over Spain, a year which forms a fitting frame for today's memorial. The Spanish Inquisition came into effect in the 1480s and the Edict of Expulsion only in 1492. But we really need to start much earlier. Jews had come to Spain probably already in the 3rd or 4th Christian century, but Jews in Spain always referred to a line in the book of Obadiah, which talked about the exile of Jerusalem that is in Sepharad, and assumed that Sepharad referred to them. Our poet Don Yehuda referred to the exiles of Jerusalem in the Kinah, the elegy, the poem of recording destruction that I just mentioned. There were some activities against the Jews prior to the Islamic conquest in 711, but in general, under Islam, Jews lived safely and securely. People even talk about a golden age. Indeed, Shmuel an-Nagid lived in the 10th century, the 10th and 11th century, wrote Hebrew poetry, and he led the armies of Granada and may very well have been the one who began the building of what we know today as the Alhambra. Polemics were written against him, but his son, Yosef an-Nagid, was the victim of anti-Jewish riots in 1066, perhaps the first significant riots against Jews in all of Europe. The Almohades, and before them Almoravides, Almoravids and Almohads entered Spain in the 1080s and the 1140s. And forced conversions ensued. Maimonides himself, the great doctor and philosopher and expert in Jewish law, is said to have converted to Islam before he escaped from Spain. Abraham ibn Ezra, the great poet, wrote a Kinah, an elegy, Aha Yarad Alei Sepharad, woe has fallen upon Spain, that was recited on Tisha B'Av, according to my understanding. Things began to heat up in the 1200s and especially the 1300s. Moshe ben Nachman, the great Ramban, was forced into exile after enduring a disputation. And in the middle of the 1300s, Peter the Cruel was in a civil war with his half-brother Henry of Trastamara, and there were massacres of Jews and mass conversions. Some think that the idea of conversos as marranos, as pigs, to use the Spanish term, dated back to those days. But our story, the story of the Spanish Inquisition, really begins with the preaching of the Archdeacon of Ecija, Ferran Martinez, around 1378. Martinez called for the expulsion of Jews and for the destruction of synagogues. He was disciplined by the church and prevented from preaching by the crown. But in 1390, the archbishop and the king both died. In June 6th of 1391, the first of Tammuz in the Jewish calendar, riots began in his hometown of Seville. Some report as many as 4,000 Jews were murdered in Seville. And within 3 months, the riots spread throughout the Iberian Peninsula, some 70 cities. Jews were murdered, they were raped, they were forcibly converted. In Valencia, for example, we read that 90% of a Jewish community of 2,500 was either murdered or raped or forcibly converted. Only about 200 Jews were left as openly observant. In all, we hear that 50,000 or more Jews were murdered, and 100 to 200,000 Jews converted to Christianity. Aragon was only a little bit better than Castile. The king was able to protect the Jews in his capital, but not more than that. One of the people who was able to escape in 1391 was our poet, Yehuda ibn Yahya. He went to Portugal together with his brother. He served royalty, and his family had a distinguished history. Another victim of the 1391 riots is a gentleman that's always known as Prophet Duran in Jewish circles. Duran converted openly to Christianity and had written a book called Al Tehi Ka'avotecha, Don't Be Like Your Ancestors. He escaped from Spain and was in what today is southern France, together with one of his friends, where he met up with yet another victim of 1391, a famous Jewish rabbi who converted to Christianity and became known as Paul of Burgos, by the way, an ancestor, according to tradition, of Juan de Oñate, who led the settlement of what today is New Mexico. Paul of Burgos convinced his friend to become a true and believing Christian. Prophet Duran wrote a book, Don't Be Like Your Ancestors, telling Jews not to believe in rational religion, not to reject the worship of stone and wood, but in fact to believe impossible things and to worship idols made of stone and wood and eat bread that was consecrated, no one knows quite how. Prophet Duran also wrote a textual criticism of the New Testament, very interesting character. Quarter century after 1391, Vicente Ferrer preached all over Spain, and many people converted to Christianity or again were murdered by the mobs. This was in 1412, and this is also remembered in poetry by the Jewish community. Chazdai Kreskis and a number of other leaders of the the Jewish community of 1400s were not converted, and people generally give numbers which range anywhere from 80,000 to 600,000 believing Jews who would not become Catholics. I don't know how many there were, and I don't know that I find any number more convincing than the others. But what is clear is that by 1470, there are lots of reports that the grandchildren of the conversos of 1391 were still practicing some aspects of Judaism, and that was one of the reasons for the Inquisition. I'll come back to this in a moment. The Inquisition was established in 1478, in order to enforce the sincerity of Christian belief and to rip out crypto-Judaism. In the first period of the Inquisition, about 90 to almost 100% of its proceedings concerned Judaizing, and occasionally even openly professing Jews who had no history of conversion to Christianity were caught by the Inquisition. Its symbolic role as an oppressor of persons of Jewish heritage informs much of the modern resurgence of an identification with Jewish heritage today. Now, there had been a papal inquisition before. That started in 1232. Historians of Judaism know about the burning of the Talmud and the burning of the works of Rambam, the Maimonides, in the 1240s. It was active in Portugal. It was totally rejected in Castile, and Aragon had a number of laws protecting the Jews. But by 1400, the Papal Inquisition really was a dead letter. Ferdinand and Isabella were both very young when they married. In an attempt to unify the crown of Castile and Aragon into what we know today as the modern Kingdom of Spain. Spain would retain a certain amount of separation between Aragon and Castile. For example, the Edict of Expulsion was promulgated in both countries, by both crowns separately. They applied to the Pope to create a Spanish Inquisition in 1478, and in November 1st of that year, Pope Sixtus IV established the Spanish Inquisition. There are numerous theories about why it was that an Inquisition was needed. Some scholars think that it was deeply religious motives on the part of the Catholic monarchs. Some people say it was out-and-out racism. Some people say it was simple economics. The church wanted to be able to attach some of the wealth of the Jews. The inquisitors conducted formal trials with rules and regulations, and some people thought that it was a response to mob rule. Finally, there are those who believe that this was an instrument of state, the use of religion in order to solidify the reign of the Catholic monarchs. I have to note at this time that despite its excesses, despite the people who were killed, the avariciousness of some of the inquisitors, by late 15th century standards, the courts of the Inquisition were better than an awful lot of things that passed for justice in Europe. In theory, the inquisitors limited the torture to 15 minutes. In theory, they could only use torture to extract a confession for somebody whose guilt was proven beyond a reasonable doubt, as we would call it today. More important for history, they kept very scrupulous records. They provided defense attorneys. They provided a number of ways in which the victims of the Inquisition could respond to their charges. They exonerated some, and they reconciled many. I don't want you to get the idea that the Inquisition was just and balanced and fair by modern standards. But we do have to put it into the context of its time. In the context of its time, it still was excessive. Pope Sixtus IV, who had in fact called for the Inquisition and issued papal bull, a papal statement authorizing it, by 1482 wrote against the excesses of the Inquisition. Well, the first inquisitors were appointed in 1480, the first autos de fe, public ceremonies that I'll talk about in a moment, were in 1481. By 1482, Tomás de Torquemada, the confessor of Queen Isabel, had become the chief inquisitor. At the autos da fe, there were many people who were paraded around in San Benito's in garments that were meant to exhibit shame, and they were great public displays. Royalty, visiting royalty, notable people were given the honor of lighting the pyres to burn people at the stake. Those who had expressed remorse for their Judaizing were given the great benefit of being garroted before they were burned at the stake, on the idea that being burned while you were dead was less painful than being burned while you were alive. I would like to remind you that over the entire course of the Inquisition, there were fewer executions than people killed by the mobs in 1391, a century earlier. But that may not be all that important. The inquisitors struck fear, and they were the most successful in their primary goal, making it impossible to Judaize, making people who did Judaize being a source of shame, making it impossible for Jews or people of Jewish heritage to hold loyalty to what they called the law of Moses over the law of Jesus, and within the time frame of the Inquisition, to cause the memory of all such practices to be erased from the descendants of those who converted to Christianity. If we can believe the language of the Alhambra decree in 1492 that set forth the expulsion of Jews, there were many conversos who never got the message. They still had access to living Jewish tradition even in 1492 and even after a decade of the Inquisition. Ferdinand and Isabella prohibited all Jewish life in both Castile and Aragon. The decree was dated March 31st, and it went to effect on July 31st, which was the 7th of the month of Av in that year. The most reliable academic reconstruction that I found suggests that 40,000 Jews left Spain, and the lower figure suggests that this was about half of the openly observant Jews. As a practical matter, the Edict of Expulsion made it very difficult to leave Spain, and people who did leave Spain had problems as well. The easiest way to leave Spain was over the frontier to Portugal. But even there were problems with transfer with cash. The Edict of Expulsion did not make it easy for people to take all of their cash and all of their belongings with them. So they were basically impoverished by the move. As for those who left, we read from Shlomo ibn Verga, who wrote about the expulsion, one of many writers in the very late 1400s and early 1500s who wrote about it. This is from a book called Shevet Yehuda. Some of them sought a path by sea amongst turbulent waters. But there also the hand of the Lord was with them to confound and exterminate them. For many of them were sold as slaves and servants in all the lands of the Gentiles. Many sank into the sea, drowning at last like lead. Others came to perish in fire and water as the ships caught fire, and thus the fire of the Lord burned against them. One of the elders who went out of Spain said that in one ship they declared an epidemic of plague. Its captain threw the passengers onto the beach in an unpopulated area where the majority of them died in hunger. Some decided to go on foot to find a settlement. His wife and their children decided to go. Not accustomed to walking, they grew weak and perished. The man passed out from hunger, and when he regained consciousness, he found his two sons dead. Although we hear about the flow of Jews to North Africa, to Italy, eventually to what today is Greece and to the land of Israel and to Egypt and to Northern Europe, we have to realize that this was not easy and many people died. Many Jews went to Portugal where things were much easier, but there too, they were forcibly converted in 1497. The Portuguese Inquisition didn't start until 1537, 40 years later, and the pressure on the Jews only became difficult in the 1547. Many Jews in Portugal, though, had a 40 or 50-year period of time to prepare. They were able to spread all over the world, and the so-called Western Sephardim, or the Spanish-Portuguese Jews, are very much their descendants. When we hear about Jews, Spanish-Portuguese Jews in London, in New York, in South America, in the Caribbean, very often they are the descendants of Spanish-speaking Jews who were in Portugal, who spread out over the entire world at that time. Many places were hit by the Inquisition, not only in Spain, but throughout the entire world. There were some 70 places in Spain itself and over 100 locations in the entire world where we hear about Inquisition trials or inquisitors coming into contact, capturing, and imprisoning and questioning people. It was as far afield as the Philippines under the Spanish and Goa under the Portuguese. In the New World, New Spain, Mexico City, Peru, Brazil had very active tribunals. There were tribunals in Cartagena, which is in Colombia today, and in Buenos Aires in Argentina. In New Spain, the most important cases against Jews were in the 1590s, where the family of Luis de Carvajal, his mother, 5 of his sisters, and a few other people were executed, being burned at the stake by the Inquisition. A second important tribunal was in the 1640s in Mexico City, where some of the leading economic powers of the day were successfully accused of Judaizing and burned at the stake. But by the 1650s, there was very, very little activity of the Inquisition that's worth talking about. The Inquisition did not only touch the lives of Jews. In 1517, far away in Wittenberg in Germany, Martin Luther was upset by the selling of indulgences, wrote a letter to his bishop. According to the story that we all learned in high school, it was posted on the door of the church, and that was the cause of the Protestant Reformation. By the 1530s, and certainly by the 1550s and 60s, we hear that Lutherans, and all sorts of other Protestants were being questioned by the Inquisition. And at that time, the Inquisition began to question freethinkers, university professors, deists, homosexuals, sexual deviants, those people who believed that marriage was not solely for procreation, and all sorts of people with ideas that the church did not think were appropriate. As the number of people that were held in the grip of the Inquisition rose, the percentage of Jews declined. What about the heritage and the awareness of the Inquisition? I sometimes hear, especially from people who have a Spanish heritage background, that the awareness of the expulsion, the awareness of the Inquisition, was minor, was not part of their radar. I'm perhaps showing my age by saying that in the middle and the last half of the 20th century, the Inquisition and the plight of what we called Marranos was very much part of our training. Biographies of heroes who resisted or returned to Judaism were a steady diet for young people. Secular Jews sang a song in Yiddish about a hidden Jew observing Passover in a cave as part of a Seder ceremony, Zog Maran. Generally, when I talk about this to some audience, I translate Zog Maran, the Yiddish, as tell me, O crypto-Jews, but I want to emphasize that in the Jewish community of America, at least as I remember it in the 60s and 70s, Marrano was like the use of the word nigger, you should pardon the expression, among the blacks. A term of shame that was transformed into a badge of honor. In Zog Maran, the crypto-Jew, the Marrano, is hiding in a cave. He has a Haggadah that he's managed to rescue and put in the nook and the cranny of the cave. What would happen if he gets discovered? He says, I will die singing. Very powerful song. What can we say about the legacy of the Inquisition today? For historians, there are hundreds of thousands of processo records. My colleague David Gitlitz, who's truly an expert in the Inquisition, has mined these records, for example, to try to get a picture of what Judaizing was like in Mexico, in New Spain, in the 1500s. He's been able to show that in the first and second generation, there may have been 50% of Jewish families, 3 or 4 that he traced, who Judaized. Within 3 or 4 generations, the number of individuals aware of Jewish heritage, and certainly those who had any positive relationship with it, became very small. The Inquisition gives us a narrative of displacement and oppression by the Catholic Church, which is felt very deeply today by some people. I hear over and over again about people who say that the Catholic Church oppressed our ancestors, and they quote the Inquisition more than anything else. I certainly hear from many people who are believing Catholics who are very happy with Catholicism. But those who are unhappy use the Inquisition to symbolize a legacy of oppression. The Inquisition provides an example of the centralizing power of the state, which used the Inquisition as a tool to create a religious establishment that would enforce religious orthodoxy. And that tool came to enforce uniformity of belief and to work against anybody who had freedom of thought in late medieval and early modern Spanish society. Although the Inquisition may have been better than mob rule in some ways, it also showed that the power of the state is more effective in the long run than the mob. The mobs forced conversion. The mobs killed people, probably even more than the Inquisition did. But the mob did not extinguish the memory of Judaism the way the Inquisition did. The Jews were, to a certain extent, the canary in the coal mine for Spanish social thought. And the religious test that the Inquisition put into place changed the nature of Spanish society at the same time in which, at least in Spanish literary circles, we talk about the golden age of Spanish literature. I have only a few more comments which I'd like to share with you. Genetics today suggests that about 20% of persons who are majority Spanish in their culture and their background, especially in Spain itself, have a highly significant percentage of Jewish genetic material, or more explicitly, genetic material which is associated with Jews, sharing genetic heritage. Even with a very small amount of non-endogamous marriage, even with a small percentage of people marrying outside immediate family, 20% with a large degree of Jewish heritage in their genes. And some of the studies suggest that this is Y chromosome only, which means only the male line. If that number is 20%, it seems to me that a much higher number have some Jewish ancestry, and virtually everybody has at least one Jewish ancestor in this community. The role of Jewish history, the role of Jewish heritage in the Spanish world has changed from something that, while, say, Franco was alive and back in the generation that had come of age before and during World War II, that realization was very small. But today, their children, their grandchildren, are very often much more aware of Jewish heritage. I am most frequently called upon to think about this issue within the context of Spanish and Jewish identity. And I'm going to quote now Celo Barón, the leading historian of Judaism in the 20th century, one of the leading historians, who wrote in a popular article, Who Was a Jew, in Midstream in 1960. In the ultimate sense, it is the subjective decision of the individual concerned and the equally subjective opinion of his neighbors, which is almost as important as the objective facts of descent and religious commitment. What we think about Jewish identity today is something that we allow to have as a subjective decision of individuals and a subjective opinion of neighbors. We no longer have the Inquisition to force this upon us. And in our society, even religious institutions aren't all that successful. On the other hand, Sarah Ruth asked me a question about this, and I said, yes, I would mention this. In the crisis that we have today with COVID-19, with a culture that is now rioting and trying to rethink how we look at history, to cancel, to rewrite history, to talk about who was persecuted more than the next person, we should remember the chilling legacy of the Inquisition. I am happy that this ceremony makes sure that once a year we spend a few moments thinking about those times. Back in Tammuz, the time of the riots of Seville and 70 other cities, and in Av, the time in which Jews left Spain in large numbers. The Inquisition came to an end July 15th. Its anniversary was only a few days ago, 1834. Let us hope that the Inquisition and the idea of stomping down the free expression of religion, the free expression of speech and ideas, is something that we will not see in our society today.
Professor Ward, thank you very, very much for your excellent overview of the Inquisition, which led into it, and its effects, how it was possibly used by the state, and implications in the world. Thank you again very, very much. We're now going to continue with our little booklet. And Rabbi Moch is going to show us here on the screen. Many tragic events are associated with Tisha B'Av, and we're going to ask that Dr. Bruce Dinner and David Renato will read these various events beginning now. Gentlemen, you need to unmute yourselves first. Dr. Dinner and Mr. Granado, if you would unmute yourselves and then start to read these. Well, why don't you and I can do it responsibly. When Israel accepted the evil report of the 10 spies, the wandering generation was forbidden to enter the promised land.
The first temple built by King Solomon was destroyed by the Babylonians.
The second temple was destroyed by the Romans under Titus.
Bar Kokhba revolt was crushed by the Roman Emperor Hadrian when he destroyed the last Jewish stronghold of Beitar.
Roman governor Turnus Rufus ordered the Temple Mount plowed under and all Jews expelled and banned from Jerusalem. He dedicated to pagan gods and renamed the city Aelia Capitolina.
Pope Urban II declared the First Crusade. 10,000 Jews were killed in its first month, and Jewish communities along its route obliterated.
The Jews of England were expelled with accompanying destruction and confiscation of books and property.
The Jews of Spain were expelled. Many who converted in order to stay and practice Judaism secretly became subject to the Inquisition, which tortured thousands and burned them at the stake.
World War I broke out on the eve of Tisha B'Av. The end of the war in 1918 saw over 400 pogroms in Hungary, Ukraine, Poland, and Russia, and the German defeat set the stage for World War II.
Mass deportation of the Jews of the Warsaw Ghetto to Treblinka concentration camp began on the eve of Tisha B'Av in 1942.
The deadly bombing of the Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires, Argentina, killed 86 and wounded about 300 others in 1994. We now turn to a short reading from the Book of Lamentations, Eicha, and then Sarah Ruth will read from the book itself. Eicha yashva vadad ha'ir, rabati am hayata ka'almana, rabati v'goyim sarati mebedinot hayata lamas.
Deserted lies the city, once so full of people. How like a widow is she, who once was great among the nations. She who was queen among the provinces has now become a slave. Bitterly she weeps at night. Tears are on her cheeks. Among all her lovers, there is no one to comfort her. All her friends have betrayed her. They have become her enemies. Her foes have become her masters. Her enemies are at ease. God has brought her grief because of her many sins. Her children have gone into exile, captive before the foe. All the splendor has departed from daughter Zion. Her princes are like deer that find no pasture. In weakness they have fled before the pursuer.
We now move on to the Sephardic Kaddish, for the destroyed lives and communities. If you're able, please rise. Rabbi Moch is going to read the Hebrew, and we will then respond by reading the David, you've muted yourself.
Rabbi Moch, Rabbi Zucker, there's no audio.
There we go. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, so let's start over again. Oh, because I'm muted on purpose. Let's see. So you have.
It also looks like Dr. Dinner's Zoom is ready to join our Kaddish.
Okay. We're going to start again from the top. Yitgadal,
Granada,
Yitkadash,
Sevilla,
Shemei Rabbah,
Toledo,
Yivarach Hirutei,
Avila,
Avila,
V'yamlich Malchutei,
Cordoba,
V'yatzmach Purkanei,
Segovia,
V'karev Mishichei,
Medina del Campo,
V'hayechon,
Saragossa,
V'yomechon,
Burgos,
V'hayei Dechol Beit Yisrael,
Valencia,
V'agala, V'bizman Kariv,
Barcelona,
Amen. V'yimru, Amen. Yehei
Shmei Rabbah Mevarach Olam Olmei Almaya,
Yitzbarach V'yishtabach
Gerona,
Verona,
V'yitpa'ar V'yitromam
Salamanca,
V'yitnaseh V'yitadar
Bilbao,
V'yit'aleh V'yithalal
Leon,
Shemei D'Kudisha
Murcia,
V'richu La'ela
Amen.
Min Kol Birchata V'shirata
Belgrade,
Belgrade,
Tushbechata V'nechemata
Lima,
Da'amiran V'alma
Mexico,
Mexico,
Amen.
Amen.
Yehei Shalama Rabba Min Shemaya Hayim V'Sava V'Yishua V'Nechama V'Shezava U'Refu'a U'Geula U'Saliha V'Chapara V'Revach V'Hatzala Lanu U'Lechol Amo Yisrael Yimru
Amen.
Amen.
Oseh Shalom B'Mromav U'Berachamav Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu V'Al Kol Yisrael Yimru
Amen.
Amen. We move now to the Bendigamos, which will be sung by Rabbi Shimon Moch.
This is a song still sung by all the Western Sephardim, whether it's in New York or London or Amsterdam and all throughout the Caribbean and Suriname in South America. Bendigamos altísimo al Señor que nos crió. Démosle agradecimiento por los bienes que nos dio. Alabado sea su santo nombre, porque siempre nos apiadó. Loado al Señor que es bueno, que para siempre su merced. Bendigamos al Altísimo por su ley primeramente, porque liga nuestra casa con el cielo continuamente. Bendigamos al Altísimo.
por el pan segundamente, bien por los manjares, comimos juntamente.
Pues comimos y bebimos alegremente, su merced nunca nos faltó.
Hodul Adonai Kito, Olam Hazdo.
Bendita sea la casa esta, el
Hogar de su presencia, donde guardamos su fiesta con alegría y permanencia. Hodul Adonai Kito, Kili Olam Hazdo. Hodul Adonai Kito, Kili Olam Hazdo.
Gracias. We close now with the Birkat Kohanim, the priestly blessing, found, of course, in the book of Numbers, the Midbar, chapter 6. Yivarechacha Adonai v'yishmarecha. May God bless you and keep you. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'yipneka. May God's presence shine on you and be gracious to you. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May God's presence turn to you and give you peace. We sound the shofar one more time. Tikiya Gedola.
Hopefully our sofer sounders will unmute themselves.
Shofarot, Dr. Nerner, Mr. Granado, can you unmute, please? My great thanks to everybody who came today and participated in this important program. Special thanks to Professor Dr. Seth Ward for his address, to Sarah Ruth for all her organizing and preparation, to Dr. Bruce Dinner and David Delgado. Special thanks to Rabbi Shimon Moch, and again, special thanks to Sarah Ruth, who was the guiding light and so much involved in the preparation for this important event. May you only know goodness, and please take note of further programs which are listed here at the bottom of your page. We'll leave this on for a few moments if anybody wants to take note of it. Thank you very much. This concludes our get-together. We wish you goodness, and may the memories which we lifted up today continue to inform us and move our hearts. Let us do honor to those whose memory we remember today. Thank you. Gracias. Toda rabah.
Well, thanks to everybody for attending. Thanks also to Ksenia for coming in from Voronezh, so far away. It's always good to see you. Sarah Ruth, I'm going to thank Giselle, who helped you get set up. Make sure, I think she's probably with you.
Yes, I'm here. Do you want to sit here? No, I'm good. You want to sit here?
It was very, I was a part of this last year as well. It's always just such a rewarding and wonderful experience. So I'm glad I could be a part of it again.
Well, Sarah Ruth told me that I should basically rework my same speech to make it just a little bit more community accessible. I hope you found it to be an improvement on last year.
Yes, yes, very much so.
Excellent job, Dr. Ward. Thank you.
Please note that the connect link to Dr. Ward's Shabbat service is in the chat. I accidentally did not, I apologize, I did not turn on the recording until into the program a little bit, so we missed the poem, which perhaps, Sarah Ruth, you can read again, and then it will be on the recording.
Oh, you missed my poem?
Yes.
Oh, all right. So you want me to recite it now?
Please.
All right. In loving memory to Bill Berg and Dr. Bernice Dinner, the Book of Life. The Book of Life is counted for each and every one, my brother, by the reflections of one's own deeds. It's looked upon with great care and great need. You see, the seed within each life is planted to be born, but it is the person, he himself, who creates it in a form. Else he just buries it so softly and deep it mourns. The spirit of life, more than just the whispers of a love, it is a harmonious song that's sung from up above. Reflections through the windows, deep within our souls. These are looked upon by God, almighty, great, and bold. The rings that link with time and love. Understanding brings wisdom too. Are these a painted fairy tale that's never to come true? No, my brother, you've listened with your heart. This book of life is real and true, limited through and through. Few thereof will make it, and others linger to. The pages are but numbered and lessened to include you. Eternity is waiting. Beyond lies the world anew. Creation in adornment. A love that's forever true. In loving memory to William Berg and Dr. Bernice Dinner.
Thank you, Sarah Ruth. And thank